So, Libby, on your other show, you did a segment about the Amazon back to office mandate this week.
Yeah, we were talking about all the Amazon workers who were sad that they have to be back in 5 days a week.
I thought it was really funny that one of their main complaints was people didn't like their talkative coworkers. Like, that was the biggest complaint. But I was really offended, actually, at one part. I have a clip. Let's go to it.
There's always that one guy who just wants to keep talking, right? I'm not going to say it's totally wasting your time, but it can be a little distracting.
You don't have to subtweet me on your other show. I'm just trying to talk to you about film. I'm just trying to persuade you that the substance is a comedy.
Ooh, Scott, I think I heard my microwave beep. I think my lunch is ready.
Okay.
I think it's time for Sound Politics now. Welcome to Sound Politics. I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. And Libby, today I'm taking over the podcast because we're talking about one of my favorite things, Olympia's political scene.
You do light up when you talk about the session.
I was just doing jazz hands.
Everybody he was doing jazz hands.
Or like magic fingers. I mean, favorite might be too strong. No, maybe it's not too strong of a word. I don't know. That's why I'm so excited this time of year, because the new legislative session begins next week. So on Monday, all of Washington's favorite and least favorite lawmakers will return to the Capitol for a 105-day sprint to discuss, debate, and distill their hopes and dreams into policy. And the biggest thing on the to-do list is fixing the budget. They're faced with a $12 billion shortfall. Lawmakers need to figure out the age-old question. How did everything get so dang expensive?
Well, Scott, I am going to let you and our panel of experts handle that question. But if you want to hear even more on what lawmakers are planning for 2025, I did speak to our new Senate Majority Leader in Olympia, Jamie Peterson. That's available in the Soundside feed we posted earlier this week, and we'll link to the interview in our show notes.
All right. And let's turn to that panel of experts. Joining me today to talk all things legislature are Paul Queary, editor and publisher of the Washington State Observer. Welcome back, Paul.
I'm glad to be here.
And Shauna Sowersby, the brand new state politics reporter for the Seattle Times. Shauna, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Paul, let's start with you. What are the big dynamics you're interested in as session ramps up?
Well, you've got this big budget hole, which, ordinarily would sort of dominate things. But you also have these really big majorities in the Democratic caucuses, which are bigger than we've seen in really several years. And in theory, that should make solving the budget relatively easy because you can let some of your moderate, or tax-averse members walk and you have enough votes to pass what you need to do. But it could also really devolve into some sort of factional dispute over what to spend money on, what to cut, all that kind of stuff. And, you could really see that, turning into kind of a meltdown within the caucus rooms. And it's going to be really interesting to watch. It's going to be a tough year for some of those folks.
Yeah, you got the moderate people who are Democrats, but they say cut the budget. And then you've got the progressives who are like, no, let's do more taxes.
Yeah, and I think, there's really a faction of those folks who think that this is, an opportunity where you shouldn't waste a crisis. You've got a big budget. This is the time to attack revenue and to reform the tax structure.
Shauna, there are a huge number of pre-filed bills that lawmakers are hoping to pass this year. Anything from authorizing mother-in-law units in rural areas to banning flavored vapes and menthols to designating an official kimchi day. What are you keeping an eye on?
I don't know that this bill has been introduced yet, but I personally spoke to now Senator Marcus Riccelli out of Spokane, and he talked about introducing a bill to eliminate medical debt from showing up on people's credit scores. The Biden administration also just announced yesterday that they were doing that as a blanket measure, and so I spoke with Riccelli again today, and it looks like that there still is an appetite for a statewide bill for that. So I'm very curious to see how that one goes as well. And then there is not that this will probably go anywhere or do anything, but there is a Senate joint measure that was introduced by Senator Bob Hasagawa for universal health care, encouraging Congress to go with universal health care. So I'm also really interested to see if the lot splitting bill that was introduced by Barkus last year, or maybe the year before that,
Representative Andrew Barkus.
that's on the pre-filed bills list. So very curious to see if that goes through. That had a ton of support the last couple times and just can't quite clear the Senate hurdle. So maybe we can get there this year.
Now, lot splitting, that's like cutting a lot in half to put more housing on it potentially, right? These are bills that sound like technical, but they will have an effect on our lives.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like lot splitting, for example, is part of the whole housing supply argument.
Yeah.
And right now, a lot of local governments have a minimum lot size. And even if your backyard is basically unused, you can't split your lot in half and build another house on it and sell that house separately. And many local governments are reluctant to do that. And so would be the state kind of preempting that. There's a lot of support for this in the sort of private kind of private market housing space and just, in general, the folks who are trying to solve the housing crisis. So, we'll see. That's something that the for-profit housing market folks, really want. And it might be a thing that becomes part of a larger deal on housing policy that includes something like the rent restriction bill that we saw pass the House last year and then die in the Senate. So.
Yeah, that's a limit on letting landlords raise their limiting the amount landlords can raise rents. And I think that the lot splitting bill, I'm glad that Shauna brought it up because that is one thing that unites urbanists, lefties, with Republicans like Andrew Barkus that she mentioned, who are more like free market, let me split my lot. It's a free country, free state. Paul, you mentioned taxes. I mean, we got to talk about the budget hole, right? Right now, Washington has a deficit of $10 to $15 billion over the next 4 years. Lawmakers have two paths to try and fix it: cut expenses or raise taxes. Which one do you think they'll go with?
Well, I've said this before in other forums, but I look at the Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, and I see a lot of votes to raise taxes and not a lot of votes to cut the budget. So, but then you get into the hard part of, okay, which taxes are you going to raise or impose? And, and I think that it gets tight then. The governor's floated a wealth tax, which is essentially a property tax on intangible wealth over a certain amount of time. There's been some conversation over essentially imposing the jumpstart tax that you have here in Seattle to the entire state. The jumpstart tax is a tax that the Seattle City Council imposed a few years ago, and it's a tax on employers who employ very high wage individuals. So it's not an income tax; it's a tax on the employer, and that has some interesting dynamics. We know that, for example, that Amazon has moved a bunch of jobs from Seattle to Bellevue since the imposition of the jumpstart tax, and different folks have different varieties of objection to those proposals. I mean, the wealth tax, for example, wealth is pretty portable, and people who are that wealthy can afford to go where the tax burden is as low as possible.
Right. Jeff Bezos moved.
Yeah, exactly. It's already gone. Right. He's he was target number one of that tax when it was proposed a couple of years ago, and he's already moved.
Yeah. I want to ask Shauna the same question, but I'm thinking about, there was this drama just before the holidays, mini drama, Twitter, formerly Twitter X drama. Governor Jay Inslee, put out that wealth tax proposal. You mentioned it. And then a Democratic millionaire, feather scion, Nick Hanauer, just lit it on fire on X, called it boneheaded. Which is surprising, right? Because it surprised me, at least, because his money helped the capital gains tax survive and thrive on last year's ballot. He's not a don't tax the rich. He's a tax me, I'm rich, I'm a Democrat. And at the same time, or around the same time, Democrats accidentally leaked plans to push for more wealth taxes this year, which, caught a lot of flack, obviously, from Republicans. Shauna, I'm curious what you think. Do you think we'll see a wealth tax or another, expanded capital gains tax? Inslee's also proposed business taxes, raising business taxes. What do you think we're going to see from Democrats?
Oh, boy. I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to answer that question a little bit better. I think it will ultimately also come down to will there be support from the new governor? Will Governor-elect Ferguson want to go along with some of these proposals from the Democrats? At the end of the day, he can sign off and say that he doesn't want to sign off on a wealth tax or any sort of B&O tax. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out.
Okay, so that capital gains tax, it's this big pile of money. You could use it to plug part of the hole, but it is already promised to something else, right? It's supposed to go to schools and early learning and childcare programs. Paul, what would have to change if the legislature decides to use the money from the tax to fix the deficit?
Well, the early learning part, so there was a big expansion of early learning and childcare support that was passed a few years ago, and that was kind of that was the impetus behind the capital gains tax. I mean, the idea was, you're going to bring an expensive new program to state government or a big expansion of a program. You should bring the money to pay for it, and that's kind of what happened there. And leaders of the Democratic majorities in the legislature are already talking about sort of delaying those big increases in child care support and early learning support, out. The law as written sort of envisions a really big increase in spending on that stuff in the next few years, and that's a big chunk of that budget hole. But that obviously causes some pretty significant heartburn for the people who voted for those programs and for the people who voted for the capital gains tax to pay for it.
Because one of the campaign promises from the people who are like, vote no, think of the children, right? It was that this money is going to go to help, those kids. And so if you expand the tax, you're also kind of playing into what the anti-tax, right, the vote yes people were saying, which is like the Democrats are going to use this to, expand and make it basically an income tax. So it seems like it would be thorny.
And the whole problem is a little thorny, and is arguably sort of created on purpose. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of enthusiastic spending of federal pandemic relief and various other kind of one-time money that kind of created this problem. And, one reason to do that is to sort of force the argument about revenue and about taxing the rich and about, reforming the tax system. And, I think we're definitely there, and it'll be interesting to see, what the Democrats do with that.
Okay, a new governor is power walking into this whole mess. Governor-elect Bob Ferguson, elect for a few more days. He's said he's interested in looking for cuts before considering new revenue. And I believe it. His transition team includes fiscally conservative Democrats like Mark Mullet. Shauna, how big a say does Ferguson get in the budgeting process? And do you think lawmakers will consider the cuts that he's interested in?
Of course, like we've seen in past, budget proposals from Governor Inslee, it's more kind of like a wish list of things that they want to see. The legislature doesn't always go along with those things. So I guess it just, again, goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's just like, where are they going to agree? Where are they going to find things to disagree on? I think that we will certainly see some sort of disagreement between the executive and the legislative branch on those.
Yeah, Paul, what do you think, Ferguson is going to be focused on in his first legislative session? How is he going to work with the legislature? He's got to.
Yeah, he has to. And, he's building out a team to do that. He elevated Katie Chapman-C, who is the legislative liaison at the Office of Financial Management, which is the governor's budget office, to the head of that office. She used to, sort of be on the other side of the negotiating table with the House Democrats. So she's got a lot of experience in how to deal with that. I mean, that indicates that they're really looking to kind of work cooperatively there. But the budget cut problem is really a pretty significant problem. Every budget cut is a program that some set of the legislature is pretty deeply invested in. There were deep cuts after the Great Recession, a decade or more ago, and the unraveling of those cuts over the years was an extremely painful process, and there are a lot of people who really don't want to go back there. So I think that, as the governor-elect, the new governor starts to sort of delve into the places where he might cut the budget, he's going to find a lot of people who don't want to do that.
Yeah, I thought you mentioned in a newsletter, I think that there's not really anybody around in Olympia anymore who was there when they made those budget cuts 20 years ago, but they all know what they have led to, what the budget cuts have led to, and it's not good stuff. And so they're going to be making those cuts very gingerly, maybe. Speaking of, I mean, we're talking about, mostly the Democratic Party, right? We're talking about the kind of the intra-party fighting between the people who want to tax and the people who want to cut. And there is this whole shuffle and kind of internal drama going on in the ranks where the party and elected officials are appointing people to fill empty seats caused by retirements or Democrats winning higher office or, Ferguson and who he's picking to lead agencies. But I bring that up because these kinds of shuffles and the kind of arcane appointment process can actually mean big things like, in the West Seattle and Burien area, right? State Senator Joe Nguyen was tapped to run the Commerce Department, and now House Representative Emily Alvarado could take his seat in the Senate. She could be put in that spot. She's a big rent control advocate. Rent control died in the state Senate last year. So I'm just curious. For both of you, what are you watching with that appointment process coming through? Shauna, you first. What are you looking at when it comes to those appointments and the changes that they're going to bring?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious to see who they're going to bring in altogether. And we've got, like you had mentioned, Senator Nguyen, pretty progressive person. Who are they going to stick in his place? Who are they going to put in some of these other positions? It's just going to be really interesting to see kind of this mix up as we go into session.
Paul, you wrote about one of these other appointments to fill Senator Couturer's seat. She won insurance commissioner, and there's like a little drama happening there, right?
Yeah, the King County Council just appointed Representative Vandana Slatter to her seat. In doing so, they passed over her seatmate, Representative Amy Wallen, who's sort of one of the few remaining sort of business-friendly moderates in that caucus. And Whalen has already come out and said that she's going to run for the seat. So we've got a sort of spicy D-on-D matchup coming in the 48th next year. And you have to figure that race is probably going to, circle around some of these questions of taxing the wealthy. The 48th, for those of you who aren't steeped in the legislative map, is the eastern shore of Lake Washington, and it,
oh, everyone knows that,
includes some of the fanciest real estate and the richest people in the state. So, that'll be a fun race to watch.
And I'm sorry, can you just confirm? Is it next year? I thought it was this November.
Oh, I'm sorry, this November, right? Yeah,
we're in 2025, Paul.
Right. So
it's here.
That there's a special election for the final year of Senator Couturer's term this year. So the primary's in August, and then whoever wins that would have to defend that seat next year in 2026.
Shauna, anything else you're going to be keeping in mind as the session begins?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always just curious to see what new proposals come up. So I've been keeping an eye on, I'm really curious as a mother of a teenager to see where the bill to push the end of the sale of flavored tobacco goes, because that is a huge problem with kids. So yeah, I'm keeping an eye on that one. And, Ferguson's going to be, I believe, releasing his budget tomorrow. And so I am very curious to also see, that will probably answer some of these questions that we've kind of been talking about earlier today.
Great. Final question. The Substance, a comedy? The Golden Globes say so. Did you see it, Paul? Did you see The Substance?
I have not seen it, but I'm aware of the premise of The Substance, yes.
What about you, Shauna? You're a big Demi Moore fan. I know it. I just know it looking at you.
I am, actually, but I have not watched it yet. Don't.
Oh, my God.
Come after me.
Get some culture, you two. You got to watch Demi Moore turn into a giant flesh monster and birth a boob in front of an audience.
All right, it's going on the list tonight then.
It's on Mubi.
Yeah.
Paul Queary, editor and publisher of the Washington State Observer, and Shauna Sowersby, the brand new state politics reporter for the Seattle Times. Thank you both for being here.
Happy to be with you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
That's it for Sound Politics today. Today's show was produced by Sarah Leibovitz and Jason Burrows. Our editor is Gabe Spitzer. I'm KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkmann. If you're excited to spend 2025 with sound politics, hey, why don't you consider a donation to the show? Please follow the link in our show notes or over at kuow.org/politics to give. And thank you so much.
And we'll catch you in a week on the next episode of Sound Politics.